Again, I'd like to introduce you now to Dr. Kenneth Buzz Shaw. He's a consultant from the Association of Governing Boards of Universities and Colleges. He's a recently retired chancellor. He was the 10th chancellor of Syracuse University. He served as a university president for nearly 30 years. Prior to joining Syracuse in 1991, he was the president of the University of Wisconsin system, and he presided over a 26-campus system, serving more than 160,000 students. He was the chancellor before that of the Southern Illinois University, and he was the president of Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville. And he has been the vice president and the dean of the University of Towson State University. He's actually been recognized by authors Fisher and Koch as one of the nation's most top entrepreneurial presidents. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree from Illinois State University, a Master of Education degree from the University of Illinois Urbana, and a PhD from Purdue. I'd encourage you to look at his full biography on your flash drives, but he's an impressive man.
I'll prove her wrong. Let's see, I don't want to do that, do I? Okay, I have to stand over here. I was going to get a little closer to you, but I guess I can't do that. We're going to talk about responsibilities of board members. And how many of you were here last year? Oh, good. So that way you won't know very much, and I can make up stories, which is what I will do. I'm hoping, now what I'd ask you to do is, while I'm talking, think about really tough questions to ask. Because before I'm done, which is, here's the bad news, I'm done at 10:30, right? Okay, I'm done at 10:30. Huh? Then I'm back. That's really bad news. But, okay. Yeah, we're good. Think about some really good questions that you have so that we can really kind of deal with what's real to you. I'm going to talk about structural things like what are your responsibilities. I'm going to go relatively quickly over that because I truly believe that as important or perhaps more important is the culture of your board. The culture is the way you behave toward one another. It's the rules, written and unwritten, that you abide by and you expect others to abide by. And often when you find serious problems with boards, it's a toxic culture. And we'll talk a little bit about what to do about toxic culture. Okay, now let's start with, I'm from Illinois. This is what happens when ethical standards are set artificially high. That's Governor Ryan, and that's Governor Blagojevich. And if you're going to be a leader in higher education, you can't be arrogant, but you have to have some self-esteem. Dear Dari, sorry to bother you again. I feel badly for that gentleman. And some of you have experienced this. I did a few years back, sitting at the table, talking with the wife. If we take a late retirement and an early death, I think we're going to make it. That gives you hope, doesn't it? Okay, now, I wanted to call your attention to something that's out there. It's called Consequential Boards. It's a recent report that AGB and a bunch of other organizations put together about the changing nature of boards. My quick analysis of it is it's very good at analyzing the problem, very good and decent at solutions. And the problem with not being better at solutions is it's tough business. The issues are tough, and how to handle them is tough too. But I want to quote through this very quickly. The premises have been disconnected often. Respect for a delineation of roles among boards, presidents, and faculty members is broken down often. Sometimes we have role drift. The northern part of this country, we have snow drift right now, but this is role drift. Some boards have moved into institutional management, never a good idea, and academic policy, even as others are basically saying, what's the use? Faculty members want to exercise veto rights over financial decisions, and politicians want to get involved in all kinds of things. As Jimmy Durante once said, everybody wants to get in the act. Board culture is central to board effectiveness. You remember that? We'll talk about that. That's the habits of behavior. And that's from this book that I hope you can pick up. It's a freebie now. After today, it's going to cost you. Okay, we're going to start with the structural matters first, and then we're going to move to cultural matters. First one's the biggest. You have a fiduciary responsibility. It's not just, no, come to the meetings. You have a fiduciary responsibility in law. It's by law in this state. Your state institutions, all of you are responsible for. It's your ultimate responsibility. So you have to take it seriously. You're responsible, and this is the most important thing you do. Recruit, compensate, and evaluate the performance of the president of your institution. If you're a system, most of you are, you do that. And then your campus heads, you have procedures for that also. Care and feeding of your institutional leaders and your system head leaders is the most important thing you do. Because believe me, ladies and gentlemen, one person can make a difference. One very bad CEO can make a lasting impression, at least for a decade. That's the most important thing you do. These are general responsibilities that you've seen. If you look at your bylaws, you have them. The educational mission, determining the academic programs, accountable for the quality of the learning experience. Don't get me wrong, you aren't going to do these things. But you're accountable for it in the sense that you should be asking the right questions. Overseers of the public trust. My colleague made the list of all the stakeholders. Boy, you got to listen to those stakeholders. The question is how much you listen to them and how it's reflected in your decision making. If you only listen to your stakeholders and don't listen to your fiduciary duties, it's going to be a very interesting situation. Institutional independence is important. Safeguarding academic freedom is sometimes really difficult. When I was at Syracuse, we had an interesting mix of students. We had a fairly high percentage of Jewish students, and we had a high percentage of African American students, Catholics, so on, and not as many Latinos as you would have. But in any event, the question of academic freedom came in when somebody was a leader of a black, we call it in my day, a black power movement, who was invited to speak. That's fine. Has every right to speak. And he was, I think, somewhat anti-Semitic in his comments because I read them in advance. Now, what were my options? And what was the board's options? The board, many influential givers were Jewish. No one said to me, you can't have this guy. He's a bad guy. I don't know if he's a bad guy or not, but if you start saying who's a bad guy and who isn't to get to speak, you're not going to have many speakers. You just have women, I guess. But so what did we do? First of all, we said, that's good. You can come, and this is going to be a big deal. It's going to be in our dome. I don't know. That was good because it seats 52,000 people, so it wasn't going to be that many. But anyway, he's going to speak, and he wants to bring his own protection. And so here's what we said. We want you to speak, and I made a public statement saying that, we have lots of speakers, and we don't agree with all of them. We don't disagree with them. We simply allow them to speak. But what we did say is you can't bring in your own policing powers. And the reason for that was we felt it would be difficult for the audience in the sense that they would feel intimidated. So we said, no, you can't. And he said, fine. And we also said, now there's some people that are really very angry, and we created an alternative place where they could, after the meeting, after the presentation, they could go and air their concerns. Okay? Now, what the popular thing would have been to basically say, no, we're not going to have this person. He doesn't represent mainstream thinking, whatever that is. The difficulty is every time you do something like that, you chip away a little bit of the freedom of your institution to pursue truth. It also allows for the freedom of fools to make fools of themselves, and you just have to accept that. And I'm not saying that person was, but you'll have some foolish things said. Hello. Boards, you define the terms of shared governments. This is going to be interesting for you. We'll talk a little bit about it in a moment. But shared governance is what happens on the campuses. And you need to understand the culture of the campuses as much as you need to understand anything else. And I was reading just yesterday about a place that just pretty much exploded. And the board and the administration had made some decisions about allocation of resources. Truthfully, they were good decisions. But they had not honored the culture of the institution, which said we should at least have the opportunity to state our views. They just came out with it. And huge. One thing you never want to do with faculty is basically not honor the process. You get in more trouble that way because very often they don't want to argue about the worth of it. It's you didn't involve us. So it's important to know what's going on, but it's also important not to be cowed by it. One of the things I learned early, because I've been active in not only higher education, but also a lot of not-for-profits, I've always been impressed with the commitment of people, CEOs of major corporations and small businesses to serve on these not-for-profits. It's always great. But what always also impressed me is that when the Boys and Girls Club head said, when he was asked why his budget was out of sync by 10%, would say, you just don't understand not-for-profits. I mean, if you understood, you'd know why. And they say, oh, okay. Well, at the end of the day, balancing the budget is not something unique to the Boys and Girls Club or the YMCA or any university. So understand shared governance, but don't be cowed by it. One of the things that I like that AGB once put out was when you have major decisions to be made, be sure that constituents have an opportunity to comment. If it's something that is their major responsibility, you really want to be sure they have an opportunity to comment. And however, you should give them timelines for comment. And if they don't meet those timelines, let it be known that after a certain period, you're moving it up. Because otherwise, it kind of dies, kind of like Congress now. No decisions can be made. Okay. You make the decisions about finance. That's all a part of it. Now, you're going to have good, solid people in finance and your president, CEOs making recommendations. You got all these constituencies out there. How do you deal with all that? There's going to be an issue that you're going to have to deal with, and you need to avoid being a one constituency board member. We'll talk a little bit about that too. That's a board, I call it a no-no. You're going to have a session on this, the legal and regulatory environment. Man, it's good that you're board members, because if you were thinking about it, you might say, oh no, all this? Yeah, but it's necessary, and it's part of your fiduciary duty to yourself and your family also to know the legal and regulatory environment. Okay, now what do? You're transparent. That's very important. You're going to expect transparency in your institutions. You want straight answers. You want good, solid information and not a ton of it, the stuff that's important. And you want it to be clear. You want to adhere to high ethical standards, open meetings and public records. And you need to evaluate your policies and procedures occasionally to make sure they're up to speed. And assess your own performance and the performance of your committees and your members. And we'll get into that. And if you don't do that, you're not being honest with your trustees, with your fellow regents and trustees, because if there are things about their performance that need to be talked about and you don't do it, you're not giving them a chance to grow. So all of those things are a part of what you're supposed to do. This is shared governance. I talked a little bit about that. Here's the most important thing, whether it's your president or your chancellor, depending on how you define the CEO. Make it clear what's expected. Okay? Now, there's a moral responsibility that goes with that. If the expectation is we have some really serious problems that you're going to have to deal with, and you have some budget issues that you're going to have to tighten up in a lot of areas, and we want you, as a part of that, to involve the community, but we want you to come in with some answers. If that's what is being said, make sure you follow through, first of all, by making sure it happens, but secondly, by not beating the person over the head when people start being angry about it. I had a good colleague that I worked with. It was a private school. I had mentored him, and so I told him I'd listen to him anytime he had a problem. He goes to this place, and he calls me. He said, "I can't believe how mad I am." He said, "I found out that we had this huge budget deficit that nobody told me about." That was his fault, by the way. But that nobody had told me about, and now I've got to deal with it. I'm prepared to deal with it. He said, "But here's how bad it is. They were using money from the foundation that was dedicated to certain things, restricted money, for balancing the budget." He says, "I got all those problems." He said, "I got 300 people with credit cards that can go out and buy things." It was a whole long list. So we went over all these things. The board said, we got to do something about this. And so we went over how he would go about it, how establishing campus committees to deal with different kinds of issues. And so he gets all this together, gets it ready, and the board chair comes in and says, this is now in April of his first year. He says, "John," he said, "you've done a good job, but John, you can't make anybody mad." And he called me and he said, "What should I do?" I said, "Well, you can either quit now or wait to be fired." And he said, "I think I'll wait to be fired." He got fired and got a better job, by the way. They had to give him a big buyout and so on and so forth. But clear expectations and honor those babies. Common sense of purpose. We're all in this together, and so we're all working for the same goal. We share the vision, and we share the plans. Meaning you have to be aware of the plans, you have to buy into the plans, and the president or whatever the CEO's name is needs to buy into your concerns. And commitment to inclusion by all stakeholders. Not easy. Some presidents, if they're not secure, will not want you to have opportunities to hear from other groups. But you need to know what's going on without messing around and mucking around in what's going on. Your relationship with that president is going to define the future of your institution. If it's bad, the future is going to be bad during the time that you're all together. And it's never anybody's one person's fault. It's never used. If it's the president's fault, get rid of the president. If it's the board member's fault or members, it's a little more difficult, and presidents have to work through that. But we'll talk a little bit about how you might deal with some of those things. What happens now? Oh, here we go. And I'm going to stop in a second, not because I'm done. I know you were anxious, but it's not going to happen yet. External stakeholders, all I want to say there is you need to be responsive to all these people. And some of you were appointed by, I don't know whether here it's the governor, does he have to have the approval of the Senate or anything? Yeah. Okay, it's confirmed, so it's the usual process. And some of you were elected if you're community, well, I guess there's no community college people here. But, so, you know, you have some relationship to the structure. And the expectation that you should go into this with is, I will do my best to honor my fiduciary responsibilities. I will listen to external pressures and interests. I will honor the people that got me this position or convinced me to take it, but I'm here, and I got to do what's right. If you do that, you don't need to do all this. Now, whoops. Let's stop for a second because I'm going to get into the no-nos, things that you shouldn't do and presidents shouldn't do. Any questions so far? Yeah? If you're talking about vision as sort of a mission, or are you talking about a vision that comes from the mission? Okay. Good question, because most of you have strategic plans, and you have a coordinating board and a big system with a lot of data, and I say that out of respect. So a lot of the vision is going to come from honoring what the coordinating board wants. So revisiting it depends on what they want. My guess is I like vision. I like vision better than a strategic plan. I think if you have a vision as to what you want to be, if you have 5 things that are really important, and then your planning change as you emphasize different parts of that. And if you have the right set of things in your vision, not often, but when somebody says you should, that is either your board or your internal constituencies, it's probably a time to look at it. But usually if you look at the mission statement, it's all pretty good. A small state college should not want to be a major university. And so on and so forth. Does that answer it, or is that just too many words? Okay. Too many words sometimes. Not by me, but others. Okay. Any other questions? No-nos. Asking big favors of administrators. What's a big favor? That's culturally determined, okay? It's a part of whatever your culture is. I'll tell you, at Syracuse, it's a private school, it's a little bit different. We go to the Final Four. You can expect a call from one of your board members saying, I want 50 tickets. I'll pay for them. I'll pay triple for them. I'll pay 5 times as much for them. I want to take all my clients, my best clients. And our answer is, we'll sell you 2. That's an inappropriate expectation. We only have so many tickets, and students get so many, and donors get so many, and so on and so forth. That's a big favor. A big favor is asking that somebody be employed. Not saying, will you take a good look at it? A good president knows how to handle that. Same way with an admissions decision. A good president knows you call and you say, how should you handle this? I have somebody in my community. It's really a good kid. He may be a little bit on the margin. Good president's going to say, well, let me get him with our very best person, take a look at him, and have a one-to-one conversation. That allows the system to see if there's anything there. That allows, if there's nuances in terms of how you're going to handle it, it's kept at the institutional level. Yes, sir.
With regard to that request, does it make a difference whether that request is coming from the board member, coming from, say, the governor?
Yes. Yes. Now we're talking about culture. Let's start with the board member. It's always inappropriate. It's not inappropriate to ask that it be reviewed. It's inappropriate to say you have to. I lost a board member this way. And it was a very high-level admissions case with, I won't mention the names of people in the entertainment industry. But the young lady, the daughter of the gentleman who was divorced and married somebody very young, and he, I don't know, out of guilt or whatever, he wanted her to go to Syracuse. He thought that was a reach, but it wasn't a reach. She was a poor student in high school. She was pretty much in the bottom 10% of her class. She was lazy, spoiled. You go down the list of things. And so, now what do I try to do? I start by saying, well, I went through all the things that we're talking about. Let's take a look at, let's have the best admissions person we have take a look at her. And so then came back and said, she needs to prove to us that she's serious. One of the ways she could do it would be she could take 8 hours in the summer and get B's. Or B pluses, C minus, whatever. No, can't do that. She's going to Europe. Well, one of the things she could do would be she could go to a community college and show that she can handle it. And we'll give her special consideration if after a semester she's done really well. no, she can't go to us. And the whole thing was a no. So we finally didn't admit her. And the board member was very upset. And anyhow, that's inappropriate. Now, what do you do with it? Here's what happens with politicians. Okay, none of you, of course, would do this. But Illinois, the state of Illinois, University of Illinois, is a premier major research university, international. Everybody wants to go there. If you got a kid and you don't want to pay 3 times as much at a private school, and you got a kid that's really smart and really dedicated to scholarship, et cetera, you probably want him to go there to save money, or if you have lots of money, you don't care. So then there's a lot of really good kids that can't get in. I mean, they're not poor students. They would graduate. They may end up being president of the United States, but they can't get in. So the University of Illinois begins to have a little group of about 150 admits that are not admissible under the standards, but are clearly decent students. There aren't any dummies in this group. There aren't any lazy ones in this group. They just aren't as high level. And they begin, these are requests filtered from politicians to board members because the politicians want to stay a little bit away from it. Some of it's directly from politicians. Everything's going along pretty well until the Chicago Tribune gets a hold of it and publishes the number and the politicians involved. The chancellor of the Urbana campus gets fired. Several board members quit. There was a call for all of them to quit, which was really unfair because they weren't all doing it. And not one politician was touched negatively. Okay? So, when you get into this, just know that you're carrying water for someone who may not be there when it explodes. Conflicts of interest, you'll get more of that than I need to say. Prejudging situations. So here you are, you're going to the grocery store. I always go to the grocery store. I don't have anything to do, no. But I like to go to the grocery store. So there you are, you're at the grocery store, and somebody comes up to you. Yeah, you're on the board, aren't you? Yeah. Good school, it's a great school. Yeah, he said, I got a concern. Okay. Now, you don't want to be rude. You're here in line. You don't want to be learned. You don't want to be rude. And you also kind of want to know because maybe there's a problem. The problem is not that they tell you. The problem is what you do with it. If you then don't do anything but decide, man, there's a problem there, you've prejudged. And it's called, in psychology, it's called confirmation bias. You begin only to see things that reinforce what you just heard. And pretty soon, you don't see anything else. So what you do is you hear him out and you say, have you talked with... Oh, I couldn't talk with him. This is too touchy. So if you no, I can't talk with... Just talk with you. I know you'll take care of it. Then you take it to the president, let him know that you had this conversation, you're not giving any value, and the president or the CEO will look into it. I tell you they will, and they'll give you some sense. But don't prejudge, because if you do, you'll go crazy. Special interest pleader and a coalition person is the one that says, and you don't have this problem because you're going to have, 6 years of steady tuition. If you support my, say for the sake of argument, my effort to raise the salaries, because I have a lot of faculty in my district or wherever I live, and I will support no tuition increase to get some people who don't want a tuition increase. If you do that and I do this, we got a deal. And pretty soon, you're just a mirror image of what happens in most state houses. Okay? And that's not your fiduciary duty, and it makes you really not a good board member. Believing the individual board member is the board. That is the toughest one. Any of you have been chairs? I know some of you have. Anybody chair now? Okay. All right, good. I've had a lot of chairs in my day, as you would imagine. And I've gotten along with all but one. Really gotten along well. And the ones that got along with well We had a very good relationship. We could talk about things, and they were free to give their views. And I was free to give my views. And at the end of the day, we had the respect of our roles for not even having to say, well, that's really a matter of management versus that's really a policy issue. Never got into that. With one, we did. I did. But believing it, this is hard for my colleague at the end of the table here. The board chair is not the boss of the president. The boss of the president is the collective board who hires, evaluates, maybe replaces, but provides a kind of atmosphere where the person can be effective. And if the chair is the boss, you've got a problem. I'll give you a real-world example that's not mine. This is a big state university, and the board is good. Except there's one guy who really is an expert on buildings and grounds. Okay, it's usually buildings and grounds or athletics. So he every Monday he calls together the team, the top people in buildings and grounds, plus the supervisor, and they talk about what needs to be done. Then he assigns jobs. Okay? Yes. He thought he was the boss of that group. He was. I mean, but that's not good. Another example, at a meeting before the board meeting, the night before, getting everybody together to have a good time together, get to know each other, network, and so on and so forth. At the table sits the president. Sitting next to the president is the chair of the board. Chair reaches over and says, I want you to fire X. This is what 6 other people at the table, and they're trying to act like they're not hearing anything. And so I said, I take it you don't like X. I don't want to talk about whether I like X. I want you to fire X. So having some training in Rogerian counseling, I said, what you're saying to me, he said, I don't want to hear any of that stuff. I want you to fire him. So this went on for a short time. I finally said, look, you obviously don't think that person is performing, and I do. If you think that in some way it's affecting the institution, then you should bring it up in closed session in my evaluation. Now, if the board agrees with you, then I'll have a decision to make. I didn't say what it would be. What would it be? I could say, well, okay, I'll fire him. I could say, I quit. Or I could say, I'm not going to quit and see what happens. Oh, it never came up in the board's executive session. That's believing you're the boss. Revealing confidences. Nothing makes the board situation more toxic than someone that has to go to the press after the meeting. When I was in one state, I'll try to avoid that since this, one of the members was elected by the citizenry. And so he played to the citizenry. And well, how do you play? You make the press happy, and you make them happy by telling them in advance what's going to happen, and afterwards, all the inside stuff. Everybody knew who it was, and it was impossible to do anything about it. When I decided to go to Syracuse from this place, I had to call all my board members and tell them. I didn't want to tell them too early, so hour before I was to get on the plane to go to Syracuse, I start my calls with the chairman, who's a great guy, down to the last guy, who was this guy. And so then I have to go home. This is an hour later to get packed, and I get there, and 3 networks are there to interview me. That's how soon he got on the phone. That's revealing confidences. Speaking for the board, usually the best situation is if the board chair and the president speak for the board. If you have, for a variety of reasons, let's say you have a vote that's close, it's fair for the other persons to have an opportunity, and it's fair to create that opportunity. One of the best ways is to have a press conference afterwards, a brief press conference, where the chair and the president basically preside, and if it's one of those contentious issues, then somebody else can speak. But you need to be careful about that one because everybody likes to think that it's important that they weigh in. If you're going to weigh in, you should be saying, if you're called about a vote, you should say, well, I didn't vote for it, but I support the board. You know, it's done now. I lost. It's time to move forward. Micromanaging, that's another issue entirely. We won't spend a lot of time. You might want to. What president, not communicating about issues and public embarrassments. The president needs to keep informed his board about what is going on. We're all proud people when we're presidents. We'd like to think we feel guilty, frankly, when bad things happen. It's our fault. We'd like to think that they shouldn't have happened. Well, that may be, but you need to know about it. But you need to be realistic. One place I went to, there's a small school in a small town, and when I went to this, one of the board members said, yeah. And the president really made a mistake last Saturday night because there was a fight, and two of the students got in a fight, and one of them got knocked down, and we didn't know about it. And I said, well, you know, there isn't a night that goes by in Syracuse that there isn't a fight between two students or two somethings. And that's a little much. And so you need to work all these things out. And not responding to your duties, not speaking up when a member of the full board overreaches his authority. Surprises. Nobody likes surprises. It can't always happen. Rogue trustees are the people that don't like anybody's ideas but their own. They make personal interests more important than the university. They violate your own rules of behavior, and they take an awful lot of everybody's time. Is absent often even when physically present. That means they're doing their mail or whatever. Wears the relative hat, or sleuthing. The sleuth is, I know we're talking about this issue, but I've got some inside information. And so they find themselves going places where they're going to get. Anyhow, what do you do about it? This is quick. You should have a governance committee. A governance committee helps you, if you have any say in who gets nominated to the board, helps you have that opportunity. You need a statement of board responsibilities, and that's in the material, I think. Okay. Portland State University has a great one. But why do you need that? Because if you have it and you have a governance committee, you can then talk with individuals about inappropriate behavior. You can create structures. If you have somebody on your board that talks all the time, interrupts everybody, and never quits, you develop a protocol. You can only talk for so long. And other protocols. Clear rules on micromanaging. Person wants to see all these people every Monday. You have to make a set of protocols that don't make that happen. And if that doesn't work, you have an intervention. And you sit around, what was it, the Goodfellas, where they sat around with the intervention, with the drug problem, and beat the poo out of him. No, you don't want to do that. But you have an intervention where you talk about inappropriate behavior. And you've done all you can, and you've given them a chance. At some point, you have to publicly say something. Because you're looking bad if you don't.